My talk is called Total Load, which is a key concept for understanding chronic health and developmental conditions in children. So my main job for the next 30 minutes is to give you a conceptual framework for understanding why we have so many sick kids today and what we can do to help reverse this incredibly troubling trend. So my first slide is basically what we're looking at is we have an epidemic that is more than half of American kids have some kind of chronic health or developmental condition. So the study that was done in 2011 was sort of the largest or broadest epidemiological study looking at how many kids have some kind of diagnosis. And they found that 54% of American kids had at least one, but sometimes two or more diagnoses. So this is autism, ADHD, asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, all the things. And that was done in 2011. So it's 2023, and no one's really done a deep dive look since then, although we're going to change that. But the problem is that everybody looks at these conditions from their own silo. Like if you have a child with autism, you might be aware that there's an autism epidemic. Or if you have a child with a life-threatening food allergy, you might think, okay, there is a allergy epidemic, like the peanut allergy epidemic. I'm sure you've all heard of, the peanut allergy epidemic. That's how we refer to these things. But this is actually all one epidemic. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you, everybody thinks about these epidemics in sort of a discrete way, like the allergy epidemic, the autoimmune epidemic, the obesity epidemic. Like how many of you have heard people talk about the obesity epidemic, right? And then, of course, there's the autism epidemic. And I'm sure you've all heard about the autism epidemic, which I just want to spend a minute talking about that because, chronic illness generally in children, chronic developmental conditions, we're looking at like less than 2% of kids in 1960 who had some kind of chronic health condition. Now we're at more than half. With regard to autism, we used to be like 2 or 3 kids in 10,000 kids in the 1970s, right? Autism wasn't even in our vernacular. It wasn't even in our frame of reference. Now, the CDC just came out this spring with updated numbers, and it's 1 in 36 children have an autism spectrum diagnosis. So when I started this work about 15 years ago, it was 1 in 150. So now we're 1 in 36. And the other thing that's interesting, and I have a really great blog post about this on the Epidemic Answers website, which is that like the CDC comes out every couple of years with new numbers, updated numbers, right? So like I was starting this and it was 1 in 150, and then it was 1 in 88, and then it was 1 in 68, and then it was 1 in 50, and now it's 1 in 36. The other interesting phenomenon is that usually after they come out with these official numbers based on new data that's coming in, it always is updated to be more. So they'll be like, yeah, in 2009, it was 150. A couple of years later, they'll be like, just kidding. In 2009, it was actually 1 in 88 because we have updated numbers. So we did some analysis on this. The number is actually much higher. It's 1 in 31 kids today that have an autism spectrum diagnosis. That's the best number we can come up with. And it is growing every single year. And then we projected forward these growth rates, and we think it's going to be 1 in 16 kids by 2033. 1 in 16 kids with an autism spectrum diagnosis. And if you look at the male-female ratio on that, because typically more boys than girls are affected, we're going to be at 1 in 10 kids, basically. 1 in 10 boys, sorry. 1 in 10 boys by 2033. That's 10% of our boys are going to have an autism spectrum diagnosis. So I'm coming at this whole issue from the big picture, looking at what is happening to our kids, what has changed over time that might be precipitating this problem. So, again, one of the problems we have when we're tackling this issue and trying to understand it is people are in their silos, the autism silo, the allergy silo, the autoimmune silo. Like, I have a peanut allergy, therefore, like, that's what I am where I'm looking for my answers. What causes peanut allergy? That is not the way we're going to get to an answer. Because the reason we are having all of these discrete epidemics is because it's actually one large epidemic. I call it the new childhood epidemics because it's really affecting our kids so acutely. And it's affecting our kids, it's affecting adults, but like because our kids are so little, because they're so vulnerable, it's affecting them in unprecedented numbers. So while we may, that's an interesting noise. I don't know where that's coming from. Oh, it's coming there because my hand was on the keyboard. So while we have all these discrete epidemics, it's all related. The reason we know it's related is because if you look at any chronic condition, whether it's developmental, neurobehavioral, like an autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, or you look at autoimmune diseases, or you look at life-threatening food allergies, all of these kids have the same underlying physiological imbalances. Okay, what I mean by that is this is like a big shout out to all the functional medicine doctors and naturopaths and people who've been looking at root causes for a long time. We know that these conditions are all related and are part of the same thing because these doctors and these practitioners have been in their offices testing these kids and saying, well, what's going on metabolically? What's going on at a cellular level? What's going on in terms of nutrition and toxicity? And what these doctors have found over the years is that all of these kids, I don't care what your diagnosis is, all of these kids have nutritional deficiencies. Could be, an imbalance in zinc, an imbalance in copper, magnesium, essential fatty acids. All of these kids are not having balanced nutrition, and there's a variety of reasons for that. All of these kids have disruptions to the microbiome. And as you know, the microbiome is a critically important part of our health and well-being. The microbiome is all the microbes in and around your body, but especially in your gastrointestinal tract. These little microbes, they help us detoxify, they help us digest our food, they help us extract nutrients from our food, they help us regulate our immune system. They're literally the master key, the master switch on our immune system. And we have, for decades, been carpet bombing our microbiome with antibiotics, glyphosate, proton pump inhibitors, asthma medications, steroid medications, chemicals, toxicity in the environment. All kills the microbiome. So if you look at a kid with ADHD, a kid with autism, a kid with autoimmune disease, they all have disruptions to their microbiome. They have decreased diversity to their microbiome. There are other imbalances that are common across these conditions. Again, nutrition, microbiome, cellular toxicity. We live in a toxic soup, right? Our lifestyle in the modern world is just filled with toxins. There are over 80,000 chemicals on the market that you can get like on the shelves of Target or Walmart or wherever you go. 80,000 chemicals that have never been tested for safety in humans. And the next speaker is going to talk a lot about that stuff. And this is present in every single one of us, but especially in our kids. Other kinds of imbalances we see are immune dysregulation. So if your microbiome's out of balance, you have a lot of chemicals in your body, your immune system's going to start going haywire. It's going to start being overactive. That's when you get allergies. It's going to be underactive, not fighting chronic infections. So all of these kids, again, my point is just that it doesn't matter your diagnosis. The kids have the same imbalances. Okay, so if we're playing a little bit of detective work here about why do our kids have these imbalances? Where is that coming from? Why would all these kids have the same things, even though they have different diagnoses? And the answer is, you have the same set of exposures to all of us, for all of our kids, right? So think about the microbiome, for instance. How many people in here have either themselves had a round of antibiotics or their kids have had a round of antibiotics? Look around, hold your hand up and look around. Just, you guys, what do the antibiotics do to your gut bacteria? They destroy it. And when it repopulates, when it refloralizes, you're going to have totally different microbes in there. Okay? Another example would be sugar, high processed food diets. That all messes with the microbiome. So too many refined carbohydrates are going to grow one kind of bacteria. And that bacteria is going to release endotoxins, which make for this greater load of stressors on your body. Another example would be glyphosate. Glyphosate is something that's it's in Roundup. It's sprayed on all of our, corn and soy and all the GMO crops. It's ubiquitous. If you eat out at restaurants, if you eat, any processed foods, you're going to get exposure to glyphosate. And what does glyphosate do? Kills your gut bacteria, right? So toxins, sugar, antibiotics, asthma medications, birth control pills. Most women in the United States have been on birth control pills at some point in their life. Okay, so mom takes birth control pills and she goes off them. And it's when she's, in that preconception period, she's messing with her microbiome. She's really altering how her microbiome looks. And when she goes off those birth control pills, she has her baby, all of that bacteria is transferred from mother to child. So what I'm doing here is I'm expressing to you all the ways that our kids, ourselves, the human beings on this planet in 2023 are exposed to all of these things that disrupt our health in really meaningful and significant ways. And again, when you get to the diagnoses, that's a bio-individual expression of how these toxins and how these stressors and exposures are impacting our health. Dozens and dozens of different things that can affect our bodies and our health and our children. Glyphosate, antibiotics, EMFs, vaccines, toxins of every shape and size, petrochemicals, BPA, all the things, right? So if you're trying to understand how to deal with this epidemic, how do I keep my family safe? Where do I start? What do I do? How do I know? I'm not a chemist. I don't know when I pick up a product on the counter whether it's safe or not. I don't know when I go shopping if that food is a GMO or not. How do you figure this out? And this is why I'm here to tell you about this total load concept, because it is a way for you to simplify this extremely complicated situation we're dealing with in modern America. So the total load theory is a concept that's been around for a long time. You may have heard in the medical community uses the term allostatic load. Allostatic load just means a lot of stressors on your body. Total load theory was first applied to autism by a woman named Patricia Lambert, who's one of my mentors. She wrote a couple great books. One is called Outsmarting Autism. And if you have a child with autism, I highly recommend you get that book. It's kind of like the Bible of autism. And then there's another book called Envisioning a Bright Future, which talks a lot about how vision is implicated in neurodevelopmental and neurobehavioral conditions. So Patricia Lambert has a quote, which I'm going to try and read. It's going to be tiny, but I'm going to try and read it. That she says to explain the total load theory. She says, when a bridge collapses, who or what is to blame? Improperly placed machinery, the engineer who conceived the design, the weight of the cars traveling over the bridge every day, the weather. Total load theory postulates that is the cumulative effect of all these factors that has brought down the bridge. So what this theory postulates is that it isn't one thing. So there's a lot of people that have an idea in their mind that it's glyphosate, it's GMOs, it's BPA, it's vaccines, it's antibiotics. Everybody has their thing, their smoking gun that they think is most responsible for this epidemic of autism, this epidemic of chronic health conditions. And in some cases it is. There's cases that have actually been litigated where kids have been poisoned by glyphosate and developed cancer. So in that case, yep, that was a smoking gun. But the vast majority of the kids that are impacted with all of these conditions, it's usually a perfect storm, a total load, a cumulative and synergistic effect of living in the modern world. And so it's not necessarily just one thing. It's many things, all these things. And I want you to understand this idea of cumulative and synergistic. So if you think about the average baby that comes through and is born in the United States in particular, this really applies to the Western industrial world, but especially in the United States. Okay, they're going to have a hospital birth. Mom might have had a couple vaccines when she was pregnant. Mom probably was given antibiotics during pregnancy prophylactically because about half of women have group beta strep, which is treated prophylactically with antibiotics. Right before the baby's even born, you get a swab. They say, oh, you test positive for group beta strep. You need to go on antibiotics before the baby's born so that the baby doesn't get sick when it's born. So this baby is already entering this world with mom's toxic load. Did mom get manicures, pedicures? What did she put on her skin? Did she get her hair colored? All these toxins are going into mom's body. Mom shares that with baby. Baby comes out already loaded with 286 chemicals that's been found in umbilical cord. There's probably more now if that study were updated. So the baby's born with a load, a toxic load. Okay, and each subsequent stressor is cumulative and makes it worse and worse and worse. And an example is antibiotics are, again, wiping out the good bacteria in your gut. Well, the good bacteria in your gut actually help you detoxify. There are studies done, for instance, where two groups of mice were given, one was given antibiotics and one wasn't. And then they were both fed mercury. And the group that was fed antibiotics and mercury actually stored the mercury in their fatty tissues, like their brain and their organs. And the group that did not get antibiotics excreted the mercury out of their body in their stool. So think about the cumulative and synergistic way that these stressors work together, right? They're making each other stressor toxic. So the total load theory is a way of thinking about our human bodies like a barrel, right? Like a giant barrel. And each stressor is like a drop of water going into that barrel, right? So again, from the day one, before baby's even born, that barrel is already half full. And they have these itty bitty little baby barrels. You know, we as adults have much bigger, stronger barrels. Keep adding water. You know, just a drop of water. You put in the, high fructose corn syrup, the red dye number 3, the EMFs, the artificial lights, the water that's got toxins in it. It's just stressor going into the barrel. And at some point, that barrel fills up. And when that barrel fills up with all those stressors, it tips over. And when it tips over, that's when you get symptom expression. You get asthma, you get allergies, you get symptoms of neurobehavioral conditions like autism and ADHD. Now, there's a corollary to the total load theory. That corollary is you can actually change the shape and size of that barrel. So you can increase its strength by doing things that are health supporting. So we'll call them health supports. These would be things like sleeping. That is an epidemic itself, sleeplessness in this country. Nobody sleeps anymore. There's a lot of reasons for it. It has to do with us not being outside, being in artificial lights, being in front of screens, being too stressed. Sleep, good quality deep sleep, actually helps you grow that barrel and increase the size and shape of your barrel. Clean water, clean air, good nutritious whole foods. That actually helps you increase the size of your barrel. Having loving relationships strengthens your barrel, increases your resilience. Microbial friends. So I've been talking a lot about the microbiome, and I'm kind of obsessed with it because I think it's a big deal. You can actually increase the good microbes you have in your body by being outside and gardening, going in the soil, being outside in nature, breathing in natural environments. You increase your microbiome, you increase the diversity of it, eating cultured foods and whole foods that are fibrous. You can help rebuild that microbiome. That also expands the shape and size of your barrel. So again, have a visual picture, size and shape of your barrel. It really matters, the health supports that you're putting in, because it helps you counteract all the stressors that are literally unavoidable in modern world, right? So you have to focus on increasing the health supports in order to deal with the stressors that our kids are getting. So you want to kind of think about this relationship: increase supports, decrease stressors, all right, and have a little bit more balance in your body. So there's another critical part of the total load theory that we need to be thinking about, which really informs why we have so many kids with autism and neurobehavioral and developmental conditions, learning conditions, ADHD, vision issues, hearing issues. When your total load is too great, when your barrel is full as a child, and you are going through critical developmental milestones, right? You're learning to see, you're learning to process things visually, you're learning to process things auditorily, you're learning to walk, you're learning to talk, you're learning to have social relationships. If your barrel is too full during those critical developmental times, that's when you're going to get neurobehavioral or neurodevelopmental conditions. Sometimes it's like a lot of cumulative stressors, sometimes it's one or a series that really impact the development. So like 10 rounds of antibiotics because you had ear infections in the first 2 years of your life. That's going to in fact impact your development. Okay, so the total load theory is important for all of us, but especially important for our kids. We need to keep that load as low as possible during those critical developmental years. So there's I've been sort of in this world for about 15 years, and I've been collecting stories from parents who have reversed nearly every kind of condition for their child, whether it's an autoimmune condition, autism, PANS, pandas, life-threatening food allergies. Like, a lot of people don't know that those are reversible, but they're absolutely reversible. And as I've been listening to the stories, it's kind of like following the breadcrumb trail. Like, well, what did you do? What did you do? And how did you do it? And you start learning these things, right? And inevitably, every single time, it's the same story in a general sense, that the parents reduced the stressors, increased the supports, and did bio-individual therapies. So you were listening this morning to Dr. Barr and Dr. Pero talking about homeopathy. Homeopathy is a very bio-individual therapy, and each child has different needs. So in every one of these recovery stories, it's almost formulaic. I don't believe in protocols. There's no one-size-fits-all anything. But again and again and again, when you hear from people who've had success stories, you hear they took the toxins out. They got rid of anything that was new to nature. So that's like a really key concept, is like, how can we assess what's a stressor in our environment? How do we know? Like, again, how are you going to know that the 80,000 chemicals that haven't been tested, whether they're safe or not safe? It's very simple. Just get as close to nature as possible in all of your products, in your toothpaste, your deodorant, your laundry detergent, your soaps, your shampoos, like all the things. Go into your home and look and say, how many ingredients are in this thing? Does it look like it came from nature, or does it look like it came from a factory with chemicals and other kinds of things that I don't even know? So you make your decisions about what's in your home based on that formula. And then supports. The supports are also really easy. Like, maybe you're like, I don't really know how to best support my child's health. Yes, you do. And it is by living as close to nature as possible, as close to how your ancestors lived. So if you think about, we've been in this modern world for a very short period of time, like 100 years, really. So think about how people have lived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. They got up with the sun. They had natural light. They had movement, exercise. They ate whole foods that didn't come from a factory. Right? They process their foods in time-honored and traditional ways. They went to bed when the sun goes down or shortly thereafter. These are all just sort of natural rhythms. And basically, if you use that as a principle, get as close to nature in the things that you do every single day, both in terms of the stressors and supports, you're going to work on that ratio automatically. You're going to reduce the stressors and increase the supports. And then the bio-individual therapies is a really important piece, because our kids have been so damaged by living in the modern world. We have to do a lot of rehabilitative work, okay? So I hear a lot of people who will say, well, like, I did gluten-free, dairy-free, I cleaned up the diet, we're all organic, we don't have any toxins in the home, and I haven't seen any improvement in my kids. I get that. It totally happens, and here's why. Because rehabilitative work needs to be done with your kids. In other words, because we're talking about kids, there was something that impaired them probably developmentally, right? Somewhere along that trajectory. So when that happens, like, let's say they never crawled, you actually need to go back and revisit those developmental milestones. So I use this analogy that I learned from another practitioner who explained the little individual stressors as like thorns in your body, right? So like gluten, for a lot of kids, is inflammatory because it's been sprayed with glyphosate for ages, and it has, when you eat it, it causes inflammation in your body. So, think of gluten as one thorn in your body, and maybe, your laundry detergent that's fragrance and has phthalates in it, that's another stressor or thorn in your body. So imagine living in the modern world, you're covered in thorns, right? And you take a couple of those thorns out, and you're in a lot of pain because you got thorns all over your body. Then you take the gluten out, you take the laundry detergent out, you take the toothpaste out, you take all the crap out, but guess what? You still got 30 thorns in there you don't even know about. So you have to encourage the discovery process and keep digging. There's more to discover. So what the best way to do that, I think, is to connect with other parents who are on a similar journey. Because you might learn something. Like, for instance, there could be a latent infection. So when your child was going through that developmental process, they picked up a Lyme or a co-infection like Borrelia, Babesia, one of those like chronic infections, and because the immune system was down, you couldn't kick it out. There's answers for that. There's ways to treat that. But you gotta kind of discover. Similarly, when there's developmental stuff like vision, hearing, learning stuff, there's so much work you can do, so many amazing therapies that connect the brain and the body and get those developmental milestones revisited. There's Moscotova, MNRI, there's Anat Banyel, there's, brain balance. There's so many wonderful therapies out there that you can use to do that rehabilitative work. So I'm gonna sort of rein it back in for a second and just sort of refresh. Total load is a theory that makes things simple. Decrease stressors, increase supports, and find the bio-individual therapies that your child needs. Now, how do you do that? You are the best person. The parent is the best person to find those things out because you know the child's history. You know that like things were swimming along until they were 6 months, 9 months, and all of a sudden, bam, at a year, something happened. The babbling went away. Or at 18 months, like he was crawling and cruising, and then all of a sudden he regressed. Go back in that history. You have to be a medical detective and say, well, what happened? Well, he had that anesthesia for that procedure, and that really made an impact. You have to unwind it and kind of go back and revisit those developmental milestones. So you're the best person to do that. There's no magic practitioner. There's no, special protocol. You have all the answers because you know your child better than anyone else. So I just have a couple more minutes, some things I wanted to share. Epidemic Answers started in 2009 to provide resources for parents and for caregivers looking how to unwind their child's health condition, how to best support them. So we have things like an online provider directory, we have webinars every month, we have all kinds of articles written about your child's condition, about different kinds of health stressors, about different kinds of health support, so it's an educational library. But we also have a community we've built, and it's called Healing Together. And we built that community as a way to walk people through the process. Like, how do you learn about total load? How do I identify the things in my environment that will help support my child's health? And how do I eliminate those things that will hurt my child's health? So all of you here, because you're here, you have a free membership to Healing Together. So if you haven't logged in and registered, I highly recommend you do that. We meet twice a month. Once with medical doctors who are available to answer questions and just sort of help you better understand what's going on with your child. It's a live Zoom call. And then we meet with Maria Rickard-Hong and Shandy Lasky, who are both health coaches and have a whole lot of knowledge, and they help navigate and answer questions. And we've sort of laid out a path for you to follow. So I welcome you to join us in that. And the last thing I want to say is that we have Documenting Hope was started to provide evidence behind what we already know to be true, which is that we're living in a toxic soup, our kids have way too many stressors, and they're sick for it. But conventional medicine and the mainstream medical community has not caught up with that yet. So when the average person goes into their pediatrician or they go to get help, they're not told to reduce the toxins in their environment. They're not told to eat only whole foods. They're not talking, I'm really generalizing. There are some great practitioners out there who do that. But on the balance, you don't see a lot of that. We need to change the dialogue about how we're raising our kids in this country, because they can get better. I've seen it. I've been watching it for 15 years. I have so many stories of kids who have fully reversed their conditions. But we, the parents, have to do the work, and we know how to. And so we started Documenting Hope to do research to give the parents more fodder for their arguments with their pediatricians, et cetera, because the argument always is, well, there isn't enough evidence that these conditions are reversible. I don't really think that a gluten-free, dairy-free diet's a good idea because there's no evidence. First of all, that's not true. They just haven't read the literature yet. But we need to do more to demonstrate the impact of the total load theory and how we can reduce the stressors, increase the supports, and have kids thrive. So we have 2 IRB-approved studies that are underway right now. You'll hear about them on Sunday. I really encourage you to come to that lecture. It's a full plenary session with the whole group here, because we'll tell you what we're learning in these studies. And I'll tell you right now, total load is real. We're scientifically demonstrating it. I'm not making this up. And also, we're demonstrating in real time that kids who have these conditions can get better. We have a study called the FLIGHT study, and it's an acronym, FLIGHT. Acronym is Facilitated Longitudinal Intensive Investigation of Genuine Health Transformation. That's a mouthful, but I really want you to focus on genuine health transformation, because you know what? That's possible for every kid. There are wins and successes out there for your kid, and we're demonstrating it. So definitely make sure you check that out on Sunday. And I think, I'm making sure I didn't miss anything from my slides, but I think that is it. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I didn't have any slides today, but we may do.